Bullies try to throw a student out the window. Big mistake. He taught them all a lesson. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Academy flickered overhead as Andrei Volkov pressed himself against the cold metal lockers, trying to become invisible. His breath came in short, controlled bursts as he heard them approaching. The unmistakable sound of expensive sneakers squeaking against polished floors, accompanied by the deep laughter that had haunted his days for the past month. At 16, Andrei was smaller than most boys his age, standing barely 5'7", with a wiry frame that made him appear almost fragile. His pale skin bore the telltale signs of someone who had recently arrived from a colder climate, and his sharp Slavic features, high cheekbones, gray eyes, and sandy brown hair, marked him immediately as different in this affluent Connecticut suburb. "There he is!" The voice cut through the hallway chatter like a knife. Chase Hartford's tall frame appeared around the corner, his perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light, his Letterman jacket worn like armor. Behind him, as always, came his loyal followers: Marcus Stone, the wrestling team's most vicious competitor whose arms were thicker than Andrei's legs, and Blake Turner, whose speed on the basketball court was matched only by his cruelty off it. Andrei's fingers tightened around his textbooks as he calculated the distance to his next class. 20 meters. Too far. They would catch him before he made it halfway. He could feel other students beginning to slow their pace, some pulling out phones, others suddenly finding their lockers fascinating. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone knew better than to interfere. What none of them knew, what Andrei had carefully hidden since arriving at Riverside Academy 6 weeks ago, was that back in Moscow, he had been training in Sambo since he was 7 years old. His grandfather, a former Spetsnaz instructor, had insisted that every member of the Volkov family knew how to defend themselves. By 14, Andrei had competed in youth championships across Russia, his technique so precise that coaches had begun talking about Olympic potential. But his grandfather had drilled one lesson into him above all others. Sila bez kontroля, это не sila, это slabost. Strength without control is not strength, it is weakness. "Hey, communist," Chase called out, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. "Where you running to? Don't they teach you manners in Russia? When an American talks to you, you stop and listen." The hallway had gone quiet now, dozens of eyes watching, waiting. Andrei slowly turned to face them, keeping his expression neutral, his body language deliberately non-threatening. He had learned long ago that predators were triggered by signs of either weakness or challenge. The key was to project neither. "I have calculus," Andrei said quietly, his accent coloring the words despite months of practice trying to minimize it. "Mr. Henderson does not like when students are late." Chase stepped closer, close enough that Andrei could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with the faint scent of the protein shake he'd had for lunch. "I don't care what Henderson likes. I asked you a question yesterday, remember? About whether your family came here legally, or if you're just another leech sucking off American generosity." The words stung, but not as much as the laughter from the gathering crowd. Andrei's family had immigrated legally, his mother accepting a position as a cardiac surgeon at Hartford Hospital, his father teaching advanced mathematics at Yale. They had left behind comfortable lives in Moscow for the promise of better opportunities, only to find that excellence in their fields didn't shield their son from the peculiar cruelties of American high school hierarchies. "We have all proper documentation," Andrei replied evenly. "My mother, she saves lives at hospital. Perhaps one day she save yours." The attempt at dignity only seemed to amuse Chase more. He reached out and knocked Andrei's books from his hands, sending them scattering across the floor. Papers flew everywhere, including the letter from his grandmother he'd been translating during lunch, her careful Cyrillic script now being trampled under designer shoes. "Pick them up," Chase commanded. "On your knees, like a good little immigrant should be. Grateful for everything America gives you." Andrei felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, his muscle memory crying out to respond. He could visualize exactly how it would go. A simple leg sweep would put Chase on his back. A basic arm bar would have him crying in seconds. But his grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Nastoящий воин побеждает без боя." A true warrior wins without fighting. Slowly, maintaining eye contact with Chase for just a moment longer than comfortable, Andre knelt and began gathering his scattered belongings. His fingers found his grandmother's letter, now bearing a dirty footprint across her words of encouragement. Something tightened in his chest, but he breathed through it, the way he'd been taught to breathe through pain during the most grueling training sessions. "That's better," Chase said, planting his foot on one of the remaining papers just as Andre reached for it. "But you missed a spot." The bell rang, sending most students scurrying to class, but Chase and his crew didn't move. Neither did the handful of students still recording on their phones, hoping to capture something worth posting. Andre remained perfectly still, his hand inches from Chase's foot, calculating. He could grab the ankle, pull and twist in one motion, leave Chase with a sprain that would bench him for the rest of football season. The temptation was overwhelming. Instead, he stood up without the paper, gathered what he had managed to collect, and looked Chase directly in the eye. "I am late for class," he said simply. Something in his steady gaze must have unnerved Chase, because the bigger boy's smirk faltered for just a moment. Then Marcus stepped forward, shoving Andre hard against the lockers. "Chase isn't done talking to you, Boris." The impact rattled Andre's teeth, but he'd taken far worse during training. He adjusted his grip on his books and started walking toward his classroom. Blake moved to block him, but a teacher appeared at the end of the hallway, Miss Rodriguez, one of the few faculty members who actually seemed to notice the bullying, and the group reluctantly dispersed. "This isn't over, Ruski," Chase called after him. "You can't hide behind teachers forever." Andre didn't respond, just kept walking, each step measured and controlled. Behind him, he heard Marcus mutter something about "commie coward" and more laughter. He entered his calculus class 2 minutes late, accepting Mr. Henderson's glare without complaint, and took his seat by the window. As Mr. Henderson droned on about derivatives, Andre stared out at the perfectly manicured campus of Riverside Academy, all brick buildings and oak trees that had stood for over a century. His family had moved here specifically for the school's reputation, his parents sacrificing to afford the modest apartment in the district boundaries. They believed in the American dream, in meritocracy, in the idea that hard work and intelligence would be rewarded. They had no idea their son spent his lunch periods hiding in empty classrooms, eating the carefully prepared meals his mother made while reading books in Russian to feel less alone. They didn't know about the daily gauntlet he ran just to get from class to class, or the creative cruelties Chase and his friends had developed to make him miserable without leaving marks that would prompt questions. After school, Andre waited in the library until he was sure the parking lot had cleared. It was his daily routine now: arrive early before the bullies, stay late after they'd gone. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, had stopped asking why he was always the last to leave. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps everyone knew and simply chose to look away. The walk home took 40 minutes, but Andre preferred it to the bus where he'd be trapped with nowhere to run. The Connecticut autumn was beginning to show itself in the changing leaves, reminding him of Moscow in October, though without the bite of approaching winter. He pulled out his phone to find 3 missed calls from his mother and a text asking if he wanted her to pick him up. He texted back that he was walking for exercise, another small lie added to the growing pile. Their apartment was small but warm, filled with the smell of borscht and the sound of his father arguing with someone on a video call about mathematical proofs. His mother appeared from the kitchen, still in her scrubs from a long shift, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Andrusha," she said, using his childhood nickname. "How was school?" "Good," he lied, kissing her cheek. "I got perfect score on chemistry test." "Of course you did," she beamed, ruffling his hair. "My brilliant boy. Come, eat something. You are too skinny." As he sat at their small kitchen table, listening to his mother talk about her day at the hospital, Andre felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. His parents had given up so much to bring him here. His mother had been head of cardiology at one of Moscow's best hospitals. His father had been a respected professor at Moscow State University. Now she worked night shifts and extra hours while he taught undergraduate courses and struggled with department politics, all so their son could have better opportunities. How could he tell them that their sacrifice had led him to this? That the golden American education they dreamed of came with a price they hadn't anticipated? That night, unable to sleep, Andre crept down to the apartment complex's basement where he'd set up a makeshift training area. Just a heavy bag he'd bought secondhand and some mats he'd found at a garage sale. But it was enough. He worked through his forms in the dim light, each movement precise and controlled, sweat gradually soaking through his shirt. This was where he felt like himself, where the careful mask he wore at school could drop away. His body moved through the familiar patterns, throws, strikes, submissions, each one executed with the fluid grace that had made his grandfather proud. He imagined Chase's face as he struck the heavy bag, then immediately felt ashamed. His training wasn't about revenge. It was about discipline, control, becoming better than base instincts. But God, it was getting harder to remember that every day. The next morning brought new torments. Someone, he suspected Blake, had spray-painted Kami across his locker in red paint. The janitor, Mr. Williams, was already trying to clean it off when Andre arrived, the older man's face tight with suppressed anger. "Don't know who did this," Mr. Williams muttered, though they both knew that was a lie. "But I'll get it off, don't you worry." "Thank you," Andre said quietly, genuinely grateful for the small kindness. "You know," Mr. Williams said, lowering his voice, "my grandson went here 5 years ago. Skinny kid, liked computers more than sports. They made his life hell too, until one day he fought back. Broke Chase's older brother's nose, got expelled of course, but at least he kept his dignity." Andre nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Fight back and lose everything his parents had worked for, or endure and lose himself piece by piece. Some choice. First period PE was always the worst. Coach Thompson, a former Marine who believed that athletics built character, had divided the class into teams for basketball. By pure coincidence, Andre always ended up on the team opposite Chase, Marcus, and Blake. Also by pure coincidence, he always seemed to catch elbows to the ribs, knees to the thigh, accidental collisions that left him sprawled on the gym floor. Today was no different. 5 minutes into the game, Marcus checked him hard into the wall, knocking the wind from his lungs. As Andre gasped for air, he heard Coach Thompson blow the whistle. "Volkov, you need to toughen up, son. This isn't ballet class." The gym erupted in laughter. Andre pulled himself up, his ribs aching, and got back in position. The next play, Blake threw the ball directly at his face. Not a pass, a missile designed to hurt. Andre's reflexes, honed by years of training, kicked in before he could stop them. He caught the ball cleanly, spun around Marcus's attempt to grab him, and drove to the basket with a speed that surprised everyone, including himself. The gym went quiet as the ball swished through the net. For a moment, Andre felt a surge of satisfaction at the shocked looks on their faces. Then he saw Chase's expression darken and knew he'd made a mistake. He'd shown them he wasn't as helpless as he appeared. That would require punishment. It came during the shower after class. Andre had learned to shower quickly, to never turn his back, to always have an escape route planned. But this time, they were ready for him. Marcus blocked the exit, while Blake grabbed Andre's towel and clothes, tossing them into a running shower. Chase stood between Andre and his belongings, arms crossed, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "Nice moves out there, Rusky," he said. "Where'd you learn to play like that? Some communist sports camp?" Andre stood there in just his underwear, water dripping from his hair, calculating odds. 3 against 1, confined space, slippery floors. He could take them. The environment actually favored someone with grappling experience. But then what? Best case scenario, he'd be expelled. Worst case, his family's visa status might be questioned. Chase's father was a state senator with connections throughout government. "Please give me my clothes," Andre said evenly. "Beg," Chase replied. "Get on your knees and beg like the pathetic immigrant you are." Other boys were gathering now, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Someone had their phone out, recording. Andre felt heat rise in his chest. Not embarrassment, but rage, pure and dangerous. His grandfather had survived the Soviet gulags. His great-grandfather had fought at Stalingrad. And here he was, being humiliated by privileged boys who'd never known a day of real hardship in their lives. "No," he said quietly. Chase blinked, surprised. "What did you say?" "I said no. I will not beg. Give me my clothes or do not, but I will not kneel." The locker room had gone completely silent. Chase's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists. He took a step forward, and Andre shifted his weight slightly, imperceptibly dropping into a ready stance. Something in that small movement must have registered in Chase's hindbrain, some primitive warning signal, because he hesitated. Then Coach Thompson's voice boomed from the entrance. "What's going on in here? Everyone out, now!" The crowd scattered like roaches when the light comes on. Chase threw Andre's soaked clothes at his feet and stalked out, but not before whispering, "You're going to regret that." Andre spent the rest of the day in damp clothes that refused to fully dry, shivering through his classes, leaving wet spots on every chair he sat in. Teachers noticed, but said nothing. Students snickered behind their hands. By lunch, the video of him standing nearly naked in the locker room had already made its rounds through Snapchat and Instagram, carefully edited to remove any evidence of who had tormented him. He found refuge in the music room, where Miss Park let him eat lunch while she practiced piano. She was one of the few Asian teachers at Riverside, and though they'd never discussed it directly, there was an understanding between them about what it meant to be different here. "You play?" she asked, gesturing to the piano. "A little," Andre admitted. "My grandmother taught me." "Show me." He sat at the bench and let his fingers find the keys, playing a simple Russian folk melody his grandmother had taught him when he was small. The music filled the empty room, each note a tiny act of defiance against the day's humiliations. Miss Park listened quietly, and when he finished, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It gets better," she said softly. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but it does." He wanted to believe her, but the weight of evidence suggested otherwise. That afternoon in chemistry, Andre was paired with Emma Martinez for a lab experiment. Emma was one of those students who existed in the middle, not popular enough to be noticed, not unpopular enough to be targeted. She'd always been polite, but distant, afraid that association with him might draw unwanted attention. But today, as they measured chemicals and recorded reactions, she surprised him. "That took guts," she said quietly, not looking up from her notebook. "In the locker room, standing up to Chase like that." "It was stupid," Andre replied, carefully adding drops of sodium hydroxide to their solution. "Maybe, but at least you kept your dignity. That's more than most of us can say." She paused, then added even more quietly, "My older brother went here 3 years ago. Chase's brother made his life hell. He never fought back, just endured it, and it ate him alive. He's in therapy now, still dealing with it." Before Andre could respond, a shadow fell across their lab bench. Chase stood there with Blake, both wearing latex gloves from their own experiment. "Careful with those chemicals, Rusky," Chase said with false concern. "Would be terrible if there was an accident." He reached across their bench, his hand heading for their carefully prepared solution. Without thinking, Andre's hand shot out and caught Chase's wrist, stopping it inches from the beaker. The grip was firm, controlled, his thumb finding the pressure point that would cause maximum discomfort with minimal visible effort. Chase's eyes widened in surprise and pain. For a moment, they stood frozen, Andre still holding his wrist, the entire class watching. Then Andre released him and stepped back. "Please be careful," he said mildly. "Sodium hydroxide can cause severe burns." Chase rubbed his wrist, his face a mixture of rage and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "You touched me," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Russian kid just assaulted me. Everyone saw it." Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, looked up from her desk with tired eyes. "I saw you reaching across their experiment, Mr. Hartford. Return to your own bench, please." "But he—" "Now, Mr. Hartford." Chase stalked back to his bench, but the look he gave Andre promised retribution. Emma was staring at him with a mixture of awe and concern. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "You barely touched him, but he looked like you were killing him." "I do not know what you mean," Andre replied, turning back to their experiment. But she wasn't fooled. "There's more to you than you let on, isn't there?" He didn't answer, but he could feel her watching him for the rest of the class with new interest. The walk home that day felt different. There was a charge in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Andre knew he'd crossed a line, shown too much of his real self. The careful balance he'd maintained was crumbling, and he wasn't sure he could rebuild it. His mother was home early, a rare occurrence, cooking pelmeni and humming an old Soviet song. His father was at the kitchen table, grading papers and muttering about the declining mathematical literacy of American undergraduates. It was such a peaceful domestic scene that Andre felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Mama," he said, using the Russian word for mother, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, mój dorogoy," she replied, not turning from the stove. "Why did we really leave Moscow?" She stopped stirring. His father looked up from his papers. They exchanged one of those meaningful looks that parents think their children don't notice. "For opportunities," his mother said carefully. "Better future for you. But you were happy there. You had good positions, respect. Here you work twice as hard for less recognition. Why?" His father set down his pen. "Andre, sometimes we make sacrifices not for what is, but for what could be. Russia." He paused, choosing his words. "Russia has a ceiling. No matter how talented, how hard you work, there are limits based on who you know, who your family is. Here, at least in theory, those limits don't exist." "In theory," Andre repeated bitterly. His mother turned from the stove, studying his face with the intensity that made her such a good diagnostician. "What happened?" "Nothing," he said automatically. "Andrei Mikhailovich Volkov," she said, using his full name in the way that meant she wouldn't accept evasion. "I did not raise a liar." What happened? So he told them. Not everything, but enough. About Chase and his crew, about the daily humiliations, about the graffiti on his locker, and the incident in the shower room. He watched his father's face darken with rage, his mother's eyes fill with tears she refused to let fall. "I will go to school tomorrow," his father said, his accent thickening with emotion. "I will speak to principal, to this boy's parents." "No," Andre interrupted. "That will only make it worse. His father is state senator. He has power, connections. We are nobody here." "Oh, we are not nobody," his mother said fiercely. "We are Volkovs. Your grandfather." "Grandfather is not here," Andre said. "His reputation, his connections, they mean nothing in Connecticut. Here I am, just foreign kid with accent who takes space from real American." The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of pelmeni on the stove. Finally, his father spoke. "What do you want us to do?" Andre thought about it. What did he want? To fight back, certainly. To show Chase and everyone else what he was really capable of. But also to not disappoint his parents, to not jeopardize everything they'd worked for. "Let me handle it my way," he said finally, "at least for now." His parents exchanged another look. Then his mother nodded slowly. "But if it gets worse, I will tell you. I promise." That night, Andre video called his grandfather in Moscow. The old man's face filled the screen, weathered and scarred, but still sharp-eyed at 73. "Dedushka," Andre privetstvoval его. "You look troubled, vnuk," his grandfather observed immediately. "Tell me." So Andre told him everything, in Russian, the words flowing more easily in his native tongue. His grandfather listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with each detail. "You want my permission to fight," his grandfather said when Andre finished. "It wasn't a question. I want your wisdom." His grandfather was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, perhaps remembering his own battles. "I taught you that strength without control is weakness. This is true. But I also should have taught you that control without purpose is cowardice. So I should fight back? I cannot make that decision for you. But I will tell you this. There are fights we choose and fights that choose us. When someone tries to strip you of your dignity, of your humanity, that is not a fight you chose. That is war declared upon you. And in war, survival is victory. But my parents, your parents want you safe and successful. These are good desires. But safety without dignity is a prison, and success without self-respect is failure. You must decide what you can live with, Andre. Can you live with continuing as you are? Or would fighting and facing consequences be easier to bear? After the call ended, Andre lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His grandfather hadn't given him an answer, but he'd given him clarity. The question wasn't whether he could fight. He knew he could. The question was whether he could continue not fighting. The next day brought an unexpected reprieve. Chase was absent, apparently visiting colleges with his father. Without their leader, Marcus and Blake seemed less interested in tormenting Andre, settling for sneers and muttered insults rather than physical confrontation. At lunch, Andre was surprised when Emma approached him in the music room. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He gestured to a chair, and she sat down, pulling out her own lunch. "I did some research last night," she said without preamble. "Sambo, right?" Andre nearly choked on his sandwich. "What?" "The way you grabbed Chase's wrist yesterday, the pressure point technique. My cousin does MMA, and he showed me videos of Sambo fighters. It's a Russian martial art developed for military. You're trained in it, aren't you?" He considered denying it, but something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. "Since I was 7, he admitted quietly. "Why haven't you destroyed them?" she asked bluntly. "I've seen what Sambo fighters can do. You could probably take all 3 of them at once." "And then what?" Andre replied. "I get expelled, my family gets sued, maybe we lose visa status. Chase's father has power, we do not." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "My brother thought the same thing. That fighting back would only make it worse. You know what he told me recently? He said the physical bruises healed in days, but the emotional scars from not fighting back, from letting them take his dignity, those might never heal." Before Andre could respond, Ms. Park entered the room. "Emma, good to see you here. Andre, I have something for you." She handed him a flyer. "The State Youth Orchestra is holding auditions next month. You should try out." "I am not that good," Andre protested. "Let them decide that," Miss Park said with a smile. "Sometimes we need to stop hiding our lights under bushels." After she left, Emma looked at the flyer. "You should do it. Show people there's more to you than just being Chase's victim." "I am not his victim," Andre said, more sharply than intended. "No? Then what are you?" He didn't have an answer. That afternoon, something shifted in the air of Riverside Academy. Andre noticed it immediately. The strange looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when he passed, the way even teachers seemed to be watching him with unusual interest. The mystery was solved when he reached his locker and found a crowd gathered around it. Someone had taped printed screenshots all over the metal surface. Images from what appeared to be a Russian news website, showing a younger Andre in a Sambo gi holding a trophy. The headlines, helpfully translated into English, read, "Young Moscow fighter takes gold at National Youth Championships, and Volkov's grandson continues family fighting legacy." Andre's blood ran cold. Someone had done deep research, had dug into Russian-language websites to find these. The crowd parted as he approached, everyone staring, waiting to see his reaction. "Explains a lot," someone muttered. "Holy shit, he's like a trained fighter. Why hasn't he fought back then?" Andre began pulling down the papers, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside. As he removed the last one, he found a note taped to his locker. "We know what you are now. No more hiding. Tomorrow, after school, parking lot. Be there or we'll find you somewhere worse." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word spread quickly through the school's social media networks. By final period, everyone knew that the quiet Russian kid was actually a trained fighter and that Chase had challenged him to what amounted to a fight. The administration seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind to the brewing confrontation. Andre considered his options as he sat through his last class. He could skip, go home, avoid the confrontation. But they'd just find him tomorrow or the next day, and it would be somewhere without witnesses. He could tell a teacher, but what would he say? That he was being challenged to a fight because people found out he knew martial arts? They'd probably blame him for hiding it. No, he realized with a sinking feeling. This had become inevitable from the moment he'd grabbed Chase's wrist in chemistry. The only choice now was how to handle it. When the final bell rang, Andre didn't go to his locker. Instead, he went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. His grandfather's eyes looked back at him. The same gray intensity, the same quiet strength. Sila bez kontrola, et slabest, he whispered to his reflection. But control with purpose is power. The parking lot was crowded when he arrived. Word had spread, and what seemed like half the school had gathered in a rough circle. Chase stood in the center with Marcus and Blake, his Letterman jacket off, his fists already clenched. When he saw Andre approaching, his face split into a cruel grin. "Look who actually showed up," he called out. "The lying little communist who's been pretending to be weak this whole time." Andre set down his backpack at the edge of the circle and walked forward, his body automatically assessing the situation. The asphalt was dry, good footing. The circle was about 5 meters in diameter, enough room to maneuver. Chase was bigger, stronger, but untrained beyond basic high school wrestling. Marcus and Blake were hovering at the edges, ready to jump in if needed. "I do not want to fight you," Andre said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Too bad," Chase replied, and swung. It was a telegraphed haymaker, the kind of punch thrown by someone who'd never been in a real fight. Andre could have dodged it easily, could have countered with a dozen different techniques. Instead, he stepped inside the arc of the swing, caught Chase's arm, and used his momentum to execute a perfect hip throw. Chase hit the asphalt hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. The crowd gasped. Before he could recover, Andre had transitioned into a controlling position, not quite a submission, but enough to keep Chase down. "Stay down," Andre said quietly. "Please, just stay down." But Chase's pride wouldn't allow it. He struggled up, his face red with rage and humiliation, and charged again. This time, Andre didn't hold back as much. He sidestepped, swept Chase's leg, and guided him to the ground with controlled force. Again, he didn't follow up with strikes or submissions, just controlled, neutralized, gave Chase every opportunity to stop. "You bastard," Chase gasped, getting up again. "Fight me properly." "I am fighting properly," Andre replied calmly. "You are not." Chase pulled back for another wild swing, but this time Marcus stepped forward to help. The moment he entered the circle, the nature of the encounter changed. This was no longer a one-on-one confrontation. It was an assault. Andre's entire demeanor shifted. His stance lowered, his eyes went cold, and when Marcus reached for him, he responded with trained precision. An arm drag transitioned into a takedown that left Marcus gasping on the ground. Blake rushed in from the other side, only to find himself caught in a standing guillotine that had him tapping frantically against Andre's arm in seconds. Chase, seeing his friends neutralized so easily, backed away, his eyes wide with fear. "You're crazy," he stammered. "You're a psycho." "No," Andre said, breathing controlled despite the exertion. "I am trained. There is difference. I tried to show you mercy, to let you walk away with dignity. You chose this." He took a step forward, and Chase actually flinched. "But I will give you one more chance. Walk away now, all of you. Never bother me again. Never bother anyone again. And this ends here." Chase looked around at the crowd, at everyone filming, at his friends groaning on the ground. His face cycled through emotions, rage, humiliation, fear, and finally, defeat. "This isn't over," he muttered, but it sounded hollow, without conviction. "Yes," Andre said firmly. "It is." He picked up his backpack and walked through the crowd, which parted before him like the Red Sea. Behind him, he heard people rushing to help Chase and his friends, heard the excited chatter about what they'd witnessed, heard someone say, "Did you see that?" It was like something out of a movie. But Andre didn't feel like a movie hero. He felt tired, sad, and worried about what would come next. The aftermath came swiftly. By the time Andre got home, the videos were already viral on TikTok and Instagram. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from numbers he didn't recognize. His parents were waiting for him in the living room, their faces grave. "School called," his mother said. "You are suspended pending investigation." Andre nodded, unsurprised. "I am sorry." "For what?" his father asked. "For defending yourself? For refusing to be victim?" "No, Moisin, you do not apologize for that. But if they expel me, then we find another school," his mother interrupted. "One that does not punish self-defense while ignoring bullying." That evening, the doorbell rang. Andre's father answered it to find a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, Senator Hartford, Chase's father. Behind him stood Chase, looking smaller than Andre had ever seen him. "May we come in?" Senator Hartford asked, his political smile not reaching his eyes. They sat awkwardly in the small living room, the senator clearly uncomfortable in the modest apartment. He cleared his throat. "I've seen the videos," he began. "All of them, including the ones from previous incidents that other students have now come forward with." He shot a dark look at his son. "I had no idea what had been happening at school." "Bullying is epidemic," Andre's mother said coolly, her accent thickening with suppressed anger. "But only when immigrant boy fights back does anyone notice." Senator Hartford had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right, and I'm here to make this right. First, Chase has something to say." Chase stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said, the words seemingly pulled from him. I was wrong. About everything." Andre studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I accept your apology. Additionally," Senator Hartford continued, "I'll be speaking to the school board about dropping any disciplinary action against your son. It's clear he acted in self-defense after prolonged harassment. I'll also be pushing for new anti-bullying measures with real consequences." "Why?" Andre's father asked bluntly. "Why help us now?" The senator was quiet for a moment. "Because I watched my son try to destroy another human being for the crime of being different. And I watched your son show more restraint and mercy than most adults would have managed. He could have seriously hurt Chase and his friends. He chose not to. That's character." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. and Mrs. Volkov, you've raised an exceptional young man. America is lucky to have families like yours." After they left, the apartment was quiet for a long moment. Then Andre's mother pulled him into a fierce hug. "Ya gorjusta boy," she whispered. "I am proud of you." The next weeks brought dramatic change to Riverside Academy. Andre's suspension was lifted after just 2 days, following pressure from not just Senator Hartford, but dozens of parents who had seen the videos and were appalled by what had been allowed to happen. Chase, Marcus, and Blake received month-long suspensions and mandatory counseling. When Andre returned to school, he expected to be treated as either a hero or a pariah. Instead, he found something more complex: respect mixed with wariness, admiration tempered by uncertainty. People greeted him in the hallways but seemed unsure how to act around him. The other victims of bullying looked at him with something approaching awe, while former bystanders appeared ashamed of their previous inaction. Emma became his first real friend, introducing him to her small circle of theater kids and artists, who welcomed him with surprising warmth. "You're kind of our hero," one of them admitted. "You did what we all dreamed of doing." "I am not hero," Andre replied uncomfortably. "I just refuse to be victim any longer." Miss Park convinced him to audition for the youth orchestra, and to his surprise, he was accepted. His mother cried when he told her. His father immediately began researching the best music programs at universities. Chase returned to school a different person, subdued, quiet, no longer holding court in the hallways. Their paths crossed occasionally, and while they didn't speak, Chase would nod acknowledgement, not friendship, but a recognition of what had passed between them. One day, Andre found a note in his locker. Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Maybe now I can become someone better. See. 3 months later, at the State Youth Orchestra's winter concert, Andre stood backstage adjusting his bow tie. His parents were in the audience, his father having canceled classes to attend, his mother having traded shifts at the hospital. Even his grandfather was watching via live stream from Moscow, where it was past midnight. As he waited for his cue, Andre thought about the journey that had brought him here. The boy who had hunched his shoulders and tried to disappear in the hallways was gone, replaced by someone who stood straight and met others' eyes without fear or aggression. He thought about his grandfather's words about strength and control, about his parents' sacrifices, about the moment in the parking lot when he could have chosen violence, but chose mercy instead. They had all led him here, to this moment, where he would walk onto a stage, not as Andre the victim or Andre the fighter, but simply as Andre, a young man with multiple talents and the courage to show them. The concertmaster called his name. He walked onto the stage to warm applause, found his parents' faces in the crowd, his mother already dabbing at her eyes, his father trying to look stern but failing to hide his pride. He raised his violin, waited for the conductor's signal, and began to play. The music that filled the auditorium was complex and beautiful, full of both Russian melancholy and American optimism, a bridge between two worlds. As his fingers danced across the strings, Andre realized this too was a form of strength, the courage to be vulnerable, to share beauty, to show all of himself, rather than just the parts that kept him safe. After the concert, as families gathered in the lobby, Senator Hartford approached with Chase. They both applauded when they saw Andre. "That was beautiful," the senator said genuinely. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Chase stepped forward, extending his hand. "You were amazing up there. I'm glad you don't have to hide anymore. Because of me, I mean. I'm sorry you ever felt you had to." Andre shook his hand, feeling the chapter closing. We all hide parts of ourselves. The fortunate ones learn when to stop. As winter turned to spring, life at Riverside Academy settled into a new rhythm. The anti-bullying measures Senator Hartford had championed were implemented with real teeth, zero-tolerance policies that actually meant zero tolerance, regardless of who someone's parents were. Several students who had been suffering in silence found the courage to speak up, knowing that action would be taken. Andre started teaching informal self-defense classes after school, with the administration's blessing. He emphasized the philosophy as much as the physical techniques: control, discipline, the difference between aggression and protection. Chase, surprisingly, asked to join after a few weeks. "I want to learn the right way," he explained when Andre questioned him. "I want to be strong without being a bully." Their first lesson was awkward, the weight of history between them. But as Andre guided Chase through basic forms, correcting his stance, teaching him to find balance, something shifted. They would never be friends. Too much had happened for that. But they could be something else. Teacher and student, perhaps. Two people who had faced each other at their worst and chosen to become better. One afternoon in late spring, as Andre was walking home, he passed the spot where Chase and his friends had cornered him behind the gym all those months ago. The muddy puddle had long since dried up, grass growing where humiliation had once pooled. He stood there for a moment, remembering the boy who had allowed himself to be pushed toward that muddy water rather than fight back. That boy had been following his grandfather's teachings, but incompletely. Strength without control was weakness, this was true. But strength with purpose, controlled but ready, peaceful but not passive, that was the full lesson. It had taken coming to America, facing Chase, and finding his own path between two cultures to fully understand it. His phone buzzed with a message from his grandfather. "Saw video of your concert. You play like your grandmother did, with whole heart. This too is strength, Vnuk." As graduation approached, the local news picked up the story of what had happened at Riverside Academy. From bullying to brotherhood, how one student's stand changed a school. Reporters wanted to interview Andre, but he declined most requests. This wasn't about fame or vindication. It had always been about something simpler and more complex: the right to exist as himself, fully and without apology. The one interview he did give was to the school newspaper, run by Emma, who had become editor. She asked him what advice he would give to other students facing bullying. "Do not be quick to fight," he said after thinking carefully. "Violence should always be last resort, but also, do not accept destruction of your dignity. Find your strength. Maybe it is physical, maybe it is artistic, maybe it is academic. Find it, develop it, and when moment comes, do not be afraid to show it. The world needs people who are strong and kind, powerful and merciful. Be both." On the last day of school, as students signed yearbooks and made promises to stay in touch, Andre found himself standing in the same hallway where everything had begun. The lockers that had witnessed his humiliation now bore witness to his transformation. Marcus approached him, still walking with slight favor from a wrestling injury. "Hey Volkov, I wanted to say something before we all graduate." Andre waited. "I was a coward," Marcus said bluntly. "I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I went along with it because I was afraid of being the target myself. That's not an excuse, just the truth. You standing up to us, it made me realize I'd rather be the one getting hit than the one doing the hitting, if those are the only choices." "They are not only choices," Andre replied. "There is also choice to stand with those being hit." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'm learning that. Slowly, but learning." As Andre cleaned out his locker for the final time, he found a small piece of paper tucked behind his textbooks. It was the note Chase had left months ago about the parking lot confrontation. He'd kept it as a reminder of how close he'd come to losing himself, either to violence or to victimhood. Now he crumpled it up and tossed it in the recycling bin. That chapter was closed. The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect June day, the kind that made Connecticut look like a postcard. Andre sat with his class, no longer separated, no longer isolated. When they called his name, the applause was thunderous. He could hear his mother's distinctive cheer, his father's whistle, and knew his grandfather was watching online, probably critiquing his posture even from thousands of miles away. Principal Williams pulled him aside after the ceremony. "Mr. Volkov, I owe you an apology. We failed you. The administration, the teachers. We all saw what was happening and didn't act. You shouldn't have had to defend yourself because we should have defended you." "Past is past," Andre replied. "What matters is, future students will not face same choice." "Thanks to you, they won't," she said. "The changes made this year, the awareness raised, your legacy here will outlast any of us." That evening, the Volkov family hosted a small graduation party in their apartment. Emma came, as did Miss Park and, surprisingly, Mr. Williams, the janitor who had cleaned the graffiti from Andre's locker. "Proud of you, son," the older man said simply. "You did what my grandson couldn't. You found a way to fight back without losing yourself." As the party wound down, Andre stood on the small balcony looking out over the town that had been his battlefield and ultimately his proving ground. His mother joined him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Any regrets?" she asked in Russian. "No," he replied in the same language. "Every choice led me here." "And where is here?" He thought about it. "Home," he said finally, and for the first time since arriving in America, he meant it. The summer passed quickly. Andre spent it teaching at a martial arts camp, sharing not just techniques, but the philosophy he'd come to understand. That true strength came from knowing when to fight, how to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. Several of his students were kids who'd been bullied, their parents hoping martial arts would give them confidence. Andre made sure they understood it gave them more than that. It gave them choice. On his last day before college, Andre returned to Riverside Academy one final time. The school was being renovated, the old gym where he'd been tormented being transformed into a modern fitness center with clear sightlines and no hidden corners. A plaque by the entrance read, "In honor of all students who have faced harassment and found the courage to stand up, whether through strength, art, academics, or simple persistence." Chase was there, helping with the renovation as part of extended community service. They worked side by side for a while in comfortable silence, removing old lockers that had witnessed too much cruelty. "You know," Chase said eventually, "I hated you for a while. After that day in the parking lot." "I know," Andre replied, "but then I realized I actually hated myself. What I'd become. You just held up a mirror." He paused, struggling with words. "My therapist says I was projecting my own insecurities about not being good enough for my father onto you, the foreign kid who was actually exceptional. We all have our battles," Andre said. "Internal ones are often hardest." As they carried the last of the old lockers outside, Chase asked, "Do you think people can really change? Like fundamentally?" Andre considered the question. "I think people can choose to be better than they were yesterday. Every day, that choice. Eventually, those choices add up to change." "I hope you're right," Chase said quietly. "I'm trying. Every day." "I know," Andre said. "That is why I agreed to teach you." That evening, Andre's family drove him to Yale, where he would study engineering while continuing his music. The car was packed with his belongings, including his violin and a new set of training mats his grandfather had sent from Moscow. As they drove past Riverside Academy one last time, Andre saw a group of incoming freshmen touring the campus with their parents. They looked nervous, excited, vulnerable, the way he must have looked 2 years ago. But they were entering a different school than he had, one where bullying would be met with consequences, where differences were increasingly celebrated rather than punished. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Heard 3 kids signed up for your self-defense class already, and school hasn't even started." "You've started something." He smiled and typed back, "Not started." Continued, "There have always been people who stand up. Now there are just more of us." At Yale, Andre found himself in a different world, one where intellectual prowess was valued, where his accent was interesting rather than mockable, where his multiple talents were seen as assets. But he didn't forget Riverside Academy, or the lessons learned there. He started a campus organization called Strength and Grace, combining martial arts training with discussion groups about conflict resolution, dignity, and the ethics of power. To his surprise, it quickly grew to over 100 members, including several who had their own stories of facing and overcoming bullying. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, one of his students, a freshman who reminded him painfully of his younger self, asked him, "How do you know when you've won against a bully?" Andre thought about Chase, about the parking lot, about everything that had followed. You win when you can think about them without anger, when you can see them as human, flawed, struggling, capable of change, when their opinion of you no longer defines your opinion of yourself. "That sounds impossible," the student said. "A year ago, I would have agreed," Andre replied. "But impossible is just another word for not yet accomplished." During winter break, Andre returned to Riverside to find the school transformed. The new anti-bullying program had become a model for the district. Chase was helping to lead peer mediation sessions, teaching other former bullies to recognize and change their behavior. Marcus had become a volunteer coach for youth wrestling, emphasizing sportsmanship over dominance. Blake had transferred schools but had sent Andre a letter of apology and a donation to the Strength and Grace organization. At a community meeting about the program's success, Andre was asked to speak. He stood before an auditorium full of parents, teachers, and students, many of whom had witnessed his journey. 2 years ago, he began, his accent now worn proudly rather than hidden. "I stood in hallway of this school and tried to disappear. I believed that if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, I could avoid notice, avoid pain. I was wrong." He paused, seeing nods of recognition from too many faces. Bullies do not target weak, they target different. And difference is not weakness, it is strength waiting to be recognized. Every person in this room has something that makes them different. Maybe it is where you come from, how you speak, what you believe, who you love, or simply how you think. These differences are not flaws to be hidden, but strengths to be developed. He talked about his grandfather's teachings, about control and purpose, about the moment he'd finally stood up not with hatred, but with conviction. He talked about mercy, about giving people room to change, about the harder battle of forgiveness. The goal, he concluded, is not to create school without conflict. That is impossible. The goal is to create school where conflict is resolved with respect, where strength protects rather than predates, where differences are seen as opportunities to learn rather than reasons to fear. The applause was long and genuine. Afterwards, a woman approached him, Chase's mother, whom he'd never met. "Thank you," she said simply, "for what you did for my son. He was becoming someone terrible, and no one could reach him. Not me, not his father, not therapists. But you. You showed him consequences without destroying him. You gave him a chance to choose differently." "Everyone deserves that chance," Andre replied. "Some just need more dramatic wake-up call than others." As his college years progressed, Andre watched from a distance as Riverside Academy continued to evolve. The story of what had happened there, filtered through social media, local news, and eventually a documentary, became a touchstone for discussions about bullying, immigration, and the power of standing up for oneself and others. But for Andre, it became something more personal, a reminder that strength came in many forms. The strength to endure when fighting seemed impossible. The strength to fight when endurance became degradation. The strength to show mercy when revenge would have been justified. And the strength to forgive, allowing everyone involved to move forward. During his senior year at Yale, Andre received an unexpected call. It was Chase, now working at a nonprofit focused on bullying prevention. "I have a favor to ask," Chase said. "We're starting a program, bringing together former bullies and their victims to speak at schools, to show that change is possible, that cycles can be broken. Would you consider doing a joint presentation with me?" Andre was quiet for a long moment, remembering the boy who had tormented him, who had tried to throw him over a balcony, who had made his life miserable for months. Then he remembered the boy who had apologized, who had learned, who had dedicated himself to ensuring others didn't repeat his mistakes. "Yes," he said. "I think that story needs to be told." Their first presentation was, fittingly, at Riverside Academy. Standing together on the stage where Andre had once performed with the youth orchestra, they told their story, the ugly parts and the redemptive ones, the violence and the forgiveness, the breakdown and the rebuilding. Chase spoke about the toxic masculinity that had driven him, the fear of appearing weak that had made him cruel. Andre spoke about the isolation of being different, the impossible choice between safety and dignity. Together, they spoke about the moment in the parking lot that had changed everything, not because of the physical confrontation, but because of what came after, the choice to learn, to grow, to become better. A student raised her hand during the Q&A. "Mr. Volkov, do you forgive him? Really?" Andre looked at Chase, remembering every moment of pain, every humiliation, every time he'd wanted to fight back but hadn't. Then he remembered every moment since, every apology, every effort to change, every person Chase had helped since that day. "Forgiveness," Andre said carefully, "is not forgetting. It is not saying what happened was okay. Forgiveness is choosing to release the anger that poisons you, choosing to see the person someone has become rather than only who they were. So yes, I forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine. And because the Chase Hartford standing here today is not the same person who bullied me, that person is gone, replaced by someone better." Chase's eyes were wet as he added, "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that forgiveness." Years later, when Andre had his own children, he would tell them this story, not as a tale of heroism or victory, but as a lesson in complexity. He would teach them his grandfather's words about strength and control, but also what he'd learned himself. That true strength sometimes meant showing your power, sometimes meant hiding it, and wisdom was knowing which moment called for which response. He would teach them martial arts, not so they could fight, but so they would have the confidence not to. He would teach them music, showing them that there were many ways to be strong, many ways to touch the world. And he would teach them compassion, even for those who seemed least deserving of it, because everyone was fighting battles others couldn't see. The boy who had hunched his shoulders in the hallways of Riverside Academy grew into a man who stood tall wherever he went, his strength evident not in his ability to fight, but in his ability to choose not to, his power shown not through dominance, but through the control to use it only when necessary. And sometimes, late at night, he would think about that moment on the second-floor balcony when everything could have gone differently, when he could have been seriously hurt, when he could have seriously hurt others, when the story could have ended in tragedy rather than transformation. In those moments, he would remember his grandfather's words, delivered across thousands of miles through a computer screen. There are fights we choose and fights that choose us. The fight had chosen him that day, but every day since, he had chosen what to do with the victory, not to humiliate or destroy, but to teach, to build, to transform a moment of violence into a catalyst for change. That, he knew now, was the truest form of strength, not the ability to defeat enemies, but the wisdom to turn them into allies, not the power to destroy, but the courage to rebuild, not the force to demand respect, but the character to earn it. The story of Riverside Academy would be told and retold, details shifting with each telling, but at its heart would remain a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating your opponent, but from giving them the opportunity to defeat the worst parts of themselves. And in that victory, everyone wins.